I wanted a kind of a vintage feel to this presentation. Some of you might remember these travel guides. This one's from 1951. We're going to start with Dyersville because it's the nearest to Dubuque. The convention was in Sioux City. That meant driving all the way across Iowa and all the way across Wisconsin. And the first presentation, which I really wanted to see, it was at 3 p.m. So I really conceded that I needed to divide this trip into two parts and decided I'd spend the night in Fort Dodge. That way I could be more leisurely in my way rather than driving like a maniac. So here's a few things of interest in Dyersville, which I've been to before. It's a stone barn with some detail shots. Mm. It was in reasonably good shape, but it looks like a little tuck pointing is in order. But you can see how homespun that brickwork and stonework is. Stone. Getting into Dyersville proper, this looks like something from an old Wild West movie street scene.
That's part of the Armstrong Lumber Company.
That's the track side. This is the Illinois Central, now Canadian National, goes through Dyersville. Mm-hmm. And this was coal, brick, lime, and cement.
Yep. Yeah, the Armstrong Lumber Company had two buildings, that one and the one further west that were south of the tracks.
And I think that one is gone.
Yeah, I think you're right. But
what's funny is I'd been to Dyersville before and never noticed this building. Mm-hmm. So that was my first stop of the day. So my goals before getting to Fort Dodge, I looked at some track charts and decided that I would investigate some ends of lines that went from Dow's, which is almost in the center of this map, and Galt, which isn't on this map, Clarion, and Eagle Grove as my route into Fort Dodge. This portion of the 1951 roadmap. So don't go by these highway numbers, because believe me, they've changed. You can see at the far right is Dow's, and then you jump a little bit north and west, and you see Galt, Clarion, and Eagle Grove. So that's what we're going to be looking at before we see a little bit of Fort Dodge. So we were welcomed into Dow's with a brick barn, which seems to have three kinds of brick on it. Unfortunately, it looks like the roof is new and they've faced the peak part of it with sheet metal. Still an interesting structure. And those bricks are bigger than your standard brick.
Those are clay tile, and they've done some tuck pointing and replaced some on the corner there.
Yeah, I can see that.
Those are neat.
Yeah, those are probably made in Mason City.
Ah, well, it's in beautiful shape. I know Mason City had a major brick and tile plant, because that's where the Alice Chalmers plant here in Milwaukee would send a lot of their kilns. Don't be fooled by the presence of railroad tracks in here. I was expecting to see the end of the line. This is a UP branch, but these tracks are largely ornamental for the purpose of making the restored depot look good. Between the time of the map I looked at and the present, the Dow's has been severed and is no longer served by rail. But it's a nicely restored Rock Island depot. They've done a little brickwork on it too, as you can see. It's an 1896 structure, and it from a predecessor railroad of the Rock Island. They don't have the ice house anymore, unfortunately, but they saved the 1905 cupola. And in the background is the museum, which of course was closed, so I couldn't explore inside. But it's a blacksmith shop, and what did that, they said blacksmith and woodwork shop, and it's on the register too. Nice example of brickwork there. It's an 1899 structure. Well, not on the National Registry, but it should be, because these are becoming really rare, is a classic Bell telephone office. It's
Mm.
closed and probably long since closed, but you used to see, Ma Bell must have had standard architecture just like railroads did for their depots, because you
Hey,
used to see
Dave,
these. Yes,
I gotta stop you there. I don't think that's a Bell building.
really.
I'm sure that's an independent.
Yep. Yeah. Iowa at one time had 390 telephone companies.
Oh, my God.
Wow. Well,
Well, good.
and I used to work for the Universal Telephone Company, which bought up these little telephone exchanges, phone companies that had 8 customers, and they'd get their bill once a year. And
Well, I worked
whoops.
on a lot of them, but not that one.
Okay, this is in again, this is in Dow's.
That probably
it's-
was the Dow's telephone company, the Dow's Farmer Co-op or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still got electrical service going to it, but the building is locked tight.
I'm sure the
This
switching stuff is still there.
Yeah, right.
this is where the track is severed going into Dow's.
Hmm.
And so next we go to Galt. And we won't spend much time on Galt, but there was this interesting structure.
Ooh, yeah.
It might, based on where the tracks are, I think it might have been part of something rail served. It looks like an office. It almost looks like a scale, actually, a scale house, but nothing particularly gripping there, but those buildings probably go back a ways. And you're welcome. Between Galt and Clarion, the tracks are entirely taken up with stored covered hoppers. The only time there would be a break would be if there was a farmer's crossing over the tracks or a public grade crossing. I think I drove for 4 miles of solid covered hoppers.
Wow.
Anyway, next after Galt is Clarion, which actually was a pretty interesting place. And they were welcoming too. This neat old truck.
No. Yeah.
I don't know if anyone actually makes that truck body. I assume this is some kind of ditcher.
That's a tile machine for laying field tile.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, okay.
Trenching. Yeah.
And the Clarion Depot, which would also be presumably Rock Island, is also nicely preserved. Boy, did it have some substantial fireplaces. But these tracks are active, at least in terms of getting those covered hoppers into the main line beyond between Clarion and Galt. They have the old-fashioned water tank. Out of the picture is their newer water tank, which itself is kind of old-fashioned. And this interesting structure with vertical siding.
Hey, Dave, can you go back 3 slides for a second? Does
There?
anybody know why there would be a window in the middle of a fireplace like that? A chimney?
Yeah, good question.
Where we,
Right by
Where
the
we-
clarion, right by the
Yeah,
clarion stand.
ah,
Yeah, to the right of the sign.
It looks
Um,
like it's stained glass, so maybe they, I don't know, that just seems strange to me.
Yeah.
I wonder, I took pictures of both sides, but I didn't include the other side of the depot in this presentation. That is a very good question.
Maybe it's twin fireplaces with separated and going up to a common chimney.
That might be,
Possible.
but
It's
it
for
was,
barbecuing.
Or maybe on one side. Yeah.
but did I mention this is Rock Island and we know how well they ran their business, so.
Right. Hey, that was what was on the blueprint, so we put it in.
The other thing is it notice that there's windows in that upper, I guess you could call it second story. So I wonder if it was a second story
Oh, yeah,
fireplace.
yeah, that could be.
And we've seen these. Found this for Ron's collection.
Looks like an early quarry truck.
Yeah.
It could well be because there was a lot of that kind of activity in the general area. And of course, and we are starting to more or less approach Fort Dodge, which had a lot of that.
Yeah, the way, yeah. Look like the big wheels are the front. The way the steering wheel situated.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So next on the map is Eagle Grove, which has a very substantial and all modern food processing plant. I did not see evidence of, sometimes they save the old parts, you know, and if you drive around enough, you can find them, but I didn't see anything antique about this one. It is huge. And Eagle Grove is served by the UP, and they even have a small yard there, and a couple of trains were waiting to be put together. So only if you're into modern day, that would take up a whole layout.
Mhm.
But this was interesting. They put every kind of sign they are praising God, they're praising Eagle Grove, and they're praising a former governor and the guard. And that was off to the side. It wasn't leaning, my camera. My camera and I were leaning. So I drove into Fort Dodge after all that, drove around a little bit, ended up in Gypsum City. There are many gypsum mining operations in Fort Dodge, and this honors one of them with some restored and preserved little mining cars. I don't know if that's real gypsum in them or not. I would assume it is. The other thing Fort Dodge has done is they've done the same thing with one of their grain elevators
Oh,
that Mankato has done with theirs, and that is this almost photographic, and it must be a process of transferring a photograph to a painted side of the elevator. But all the sides of the elevator had different painted scenes on them, really kind of neat. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's close enough to some rail that I'm sure at one time it was rail served. And on one side, it does say it's part of the Fort Dodge Grain Terminal.
Dave, can I tell you something, please?
Sure.
Yeah, keep it on that. I used to build cameras that do that, or actuators that do that.
no kidding.
Yeah. And you set up, you can adjust it for perspective control, and you shoot a picture up there, and the guy climbs on scaffolding and he starts penciling it in and then starts painting it.
No kidding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
On
But
sides of buildings, on sides of all sorts of stuff.
Huh.
But the artist who did that one in Fort Dodge was working from a photograph he was holding in his hand.
Oh, that's possible, sure. Yeah.
There's been some newspaper stories and stuff about him because
My
he came
God.
in from out of state, and that's, you know, he just built up scaffold, and he also used bucket trucks, a crane, and he just started sketching out. But he just had a couple of photographs in his hands that he was using.
Wow.
Very, very talented.
Yeah.
Even the one in Mankato is even more elaborate and larger, but it has the same, I guess you could call it color palette, kind of a sepia tone. And that same extreme, it seems like extreme tightness of focus and detail. It's an impressive piece of work.
He's using the concrete as a color.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could very well be the same artist. Because he's gone around the Midwest here and has done several of these based on the stories I saw in the paper.
Hmm.
So,
Well, that's interesting. Okay. We move on. So I spent the night in Fort Dodge and decided that my next day's adventures were going to start by exploring another end of track situation. Just as I was checking into the Fort Dodge hotel I stayed at, a UP local was heading back into Fort Dodge from the line that goes to Moorland and Summers. If you Moorland is kind of in the center of this piece of the map. Summer is closer to the lower left-hand corner. On the map that I had, Summers was shown as the end of track. Once again, my map was outdated. But here we are in beautiful Moreland with one of the actually nicer houses in town. Here's the Summers Library, ready for its next summer reading contest for the kids. Maybe not one of the best structures in Summers, but the tracks were nowhere to be seen. I did see a piece of an abutment from where they'd gone. As soon as you can see certain streets or houses that are at an angle other than 90 degrees to the other streets, you begin to suspect that's where the rail line is. So Summers was kind of a bust.
Ask you about Summers. Is
Yes.
Summers where the creamery was that we see refrigerator cars labeled for?
No, because the spelling's different. But that
Okay.
is on the Chicago and Great Western Main Line from Fort Dodge going to Omaha.
I thought that was up in the northern part, up more closer to Mason City.
Yeah, it's up more in the, further north, but yes. But yeah, that Summers has got only one M. The other one, you're thinking about, I think has got two M's.
Hmm.
And they truncate, the tracks are truncated just outside of Summers because they serve a large fertilizer plant between Moreland and Fort Dodge. Moreland
Yes.
was where the M and St. L crossed the Great Western.
The place out of Moreland that you're talking about, I actually thought I had pictures of it in this presentation, and they're not where I thought they were supposed to be, so I apologize for that. But yeah, it's not a city, it's got a railroad name to it.
Mhm.
Let's see.
Yes. Yeah, you
All right.
got-
So
Nancy?
the next thing I went back to Fort Dodge and then headed out on what this map says
Right.
is 5, but it wasn't Highway 5. I wanted to go to Manson. So I was welcomed to Manson. And yes, this is kind of an interesting trifecta. And I think this is the Illinois Central.
It would be, yes.
Yeah, former Illinois Central, now Canadian National. But it's, I didn't see any trains. Apparently they just run 1 or 2 a day now. But this interesting building was also in Manson.
That looks like it could be a fertilizer building.
Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah,
Mm.
with that
Nice.
conveyor going down underground and Yep.
Right. Yep.
yeah. And it looks like a board and batten kind of
reinforcement to hold the contents of the building in
Yeah,
place.
the bulk fertilizer. Mhm.
so now we're seeing Manson. And my next goal was to get to Fonda.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh,
once
beautiful.
once again, a beautiful example of the bricklayer's art. And some interesting elevators. Fonda, actually, there was another railroad that went through Fonda, and I think these elevators were on the right of way of that other railroad. I don't know if that was the Minneapolis and St. Louis, or maybe the Northwestern.
Would have been Northwestern, pretty sure.
So I saw no sign. I saw no sign of the crossing. It must have been removed years ago.
Mm.
A nice rusting pattern on that center building.
Honda was Milwaukee and IC.
Okay, Milwaukee Road. Okay. So I assume that these were served by the Milwaukee because they're at an angle to the IC, and there was no sign that there'd ever been an IC siding to this. Next stop is Newell. And another couple of interesting trackside elevators.
Dave, could you go back to? Yeah, that one. Okay. That's interesting. I'm putting my eyes out of focus and I see a cat.
Yeah, I kind of do too.
You mean the pattern in the building?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, a little caffeine and it helps.
Okay, Ken, we're gonna be looking for the model with the weathering technique that shows the cat at the next.
Well, I think that artist did a great job there. I mean, he's faking everyone out.
Yeah,
There's also kind of an interesting piece of patchwork on the building to the right.
Yeah.
yep. Yep,
And that, whatever that vertical tank is with the fuzzy looking insulation on it would be
Yep.
an interesting model challenge.
that's a spray foam insulation for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That damage on that building there that's been fixed, I think that was a fire that got put out.
Could be, sure.
Well,
Green-
Sure looks like it, yep.
one thing I didn't include in this presentation, but there must have been a huge satellite, I mean, like a cell phone or a tower of some kind that must have collapsed in a huge windstorm. And they had moved it out of the way, but it was very much on display. It was just bent up like you bend something made out of tinfoil. So we are in Newell. But we'll pass quickly to Sulphur Springs, also on the Illinois Central Canadian National. And Sulphur Springs has relatively little of interest in it, but it is what I would call the city of Quonset huts.
Mm.
Yep,
I think those were probably built for the sealed corn back when the government built them.
Oh,
Seed corn.
probably World War II surplus that local elevator bought and put up for storage,
Sure.
corn, etc. But yeah, from that time period.
the one nearest to us is in much better shape than the three beyond. And I took many pictures of this elevator and my camera malfunctioned. We're in Aurelia, which I didn't even plan to visit. But you're talking about things that you do with concrete elevators. One of them is to patch them up. There was an elevator in Milwaukee, a Chicago Northwestern elevator right on the river that every year we'd get a free calendar from the newspaper of student art. And it seems like all these students would go to try and paint this elevator because of the striking pattern of the tar patches.
Right.
So I've thoroughly photographed this elevator, and this is the only picture that survived.
Oh,
That's the problem with owning a camera that's as old as my car, 2008. So we are now in Sioux City. I've went to a few places that aren't as part of this presentation, including Correctionville. But now we're now in Sioux City, and there's a very interesting railroad museum, the Sioux City Railroad Museum. And what makes it so interesting is it's on the site of a Milwaukee Road engine facility and yard, and they have 6 remaining brick buildings from the Milwaukee Road.
wow.
Now, the most significant of them, the roundhouse, is reduced, I think, to 4 or 5 stalls, and it used to be a huge roundhouse. But nonetheless, part of it is preserved, and that counts for something. And they have some displays in some of these. Here's a Denver and Rio Grande Western bulkhead flat, the kind that has the locker at the end. I think we were talking about these a few months ago, this kind of bulkhead flat as part of one of these presentations.
Yeah, that's old. It's got polling pockets.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't catch at least not in this photo. I can't see the build date on the car, assuming I could even see what it was. But it's still got its solid bearing trucks too. And they had a Northwestern waffle-sided car, which isn't really all that old, but it's not the sort of thing that people would think to preserve. And what I found interesting about this one is the signs of coopering the door from the damage done by some forklift jockey.
Wow.
it may be Bondo, I don't know. But he punctured enough holes in it that they just plugged them up.
Mhm.
And that gave me an idea for a future frugal modeler column in the Midwest region waybill. So I was very thankful to come across this car. In what I assume was one of their machine shops. These aren't necessarily Milwaukee Road machines, but they're interesting, beautifully preserved, nicely painted. Maybe they shouldn't be outside in the weather, but if they're taken care of, it might be okay. Inside, they have a coreless
Wow.
steam engine. And that is I should have asked someone to stand in the photo so you could get a feel for the scale of how big it is. Picture taking was not easy in that building. So this was from a former Swift packing house.
It's a compressor.
Each half of the flywheel weighs nearly 5 tons.
Wow.
Yep. And all those fittings outside were probably related to the refrigeration and or steam of probably the packing house as well.
That's very likely. And when I mentioned that the first presentation at the convention itself was on Thursday at 3 p.m., it was all about the stockyards
Mhm.
of Sioux City, and it was an incredible presentation. And you drive around; it's a maze of railroad tracks you can't make any sense of, but it only makes sense when you realize where all the stockyards were.
Was that John Greedy doing that?
I think it was.
Yep,
Yeah.
he grew up in Sioux
Yeah.
City.
Yes, it was John Greedy.
Mhm.
And this was this interesting kind of homespun looking tractor was in that same building, but it was not placed where you could get a nice 3/4 view of it. So this is the best I could do. And I saw this beyond the fence, as you can see from the signs of the fence interfering with the lens.
Mhm.
Here's the roundhouse.
One time that was 30 stalls.
Yeah, it was, and you can still see where the stalls were because the concrete foundations is all still there. You can walk the floor, but you're just not inside a roundhouse. And they've got a turntable. That little critter is painted Milwaukee Road, whether it's actually a Milwaukee Road engine. The Milwaukee Road certainly had some engines like that, but it's, I guess, every once in a while they fire it up and run it around their minimum tracks. This is a Great Northern 462, and it's appropriate that it be in Sioux City because the Great Northern went to Sioux City, and then the BNSF does today. It's in beautiful condition. It really is in nice shape. They have another steam locomotive, a diesel, some other stuff. It's a nice museum and well worth your while if you find your way to Sioux City. They also had this single sheathed boxcar. Someone connected with the museum said it was Rock Island, but I didn't find any documentation to say that it was Rock Island, but since he should know, I guess I have to believe him. But it was a chance to get a few detail shots for this kind of car, including how they had to keep the door away from the side bracing, the diagonals and the verticals.
Whenever you find a car you don't know, always check the trucks. Sometimes they're lettered on the trucks.
Yes, I did check the trucks, but I've reached the age where bending down is unless there's someone right there to help me get back up again, is not maybe the best idea. And I vividly remember building Silver Streak boxcar kits that had those ribs on the roof, and that's how mine actually looked. I feel much better about that. Anyway, it's a wood car. It's outside, which isn't the best, but they've got some projects on their hands. And one thing they have there is a little model railroad in one of the buildings. And I thought this was one of the more striking scenes on it. And I did take this shot only because it gives me an idea for the backdrop, kind of a 3D effect. So one of the interesting things about this year's Northwestern Historical Society meet was they actually had as a formal part of the schedule, and not something that you could do on your way home on Sunday, but as a formal part of the schedule on Friday, was to visit the layout of John Koskovich. That's John, and a portion of his layout. I didn't photograph the whole thing. Here's just a few examples. Sidewinder type cats, presumably lifting up the locomotive. He had a very extensive, what looks like an ethanol plant,
Yeah.
and a very realistic thunderstorm. I just happened to click this picture when that lightning bolt was lit up. Oh, there's the plant. Some nice modeling on this layout, and some things that I would do differently, but that's, since he has a layout and I really don't, who am I to poke holes? Then one of the tours that we took, Sioux City not only had a lot of stockyards, but they seem to have an inordinate number of beacons, van, and storage buildings. I mean, there were many of them. This is one of them. It's now residential. We went to State Steel, which was, it's not a steel mill. It's a steel processing plant where they get steel in coils by rail. They put it through high pressure presses to thin it, and then they cut it to sizes dictated by the customer. And we had a complete tour. We could take photos. They did not make us sign a release. They did not make us wear safety glasses or shun people who had open-toed shoes. It was kind of a throwback factory tour. I was very interested in this brick building. Someone mentioned what it used to be, and I should have written it down in my notes. And now I do not know what it was. But I may send these pictures to someone connected with the meet and get that information from them. Anyway, here's the inside of State Steel. And the process both of running the coiled steel through the incredible roller press and then chopping it to size was extremely loud. And not surprisingly, the owner of the processing plant, who wore glasses, had hearing aids on both ears. But again, we were given full access. No one was saying, don't go that way, don't walk down that aisle, follow the leader. Nope, you could essentially go where you wished. That's where the coil is run through the machine, the rollers that thin it. It comes to them, I think, 1/4 inch thick, and then they make it slightly thinner. There's the cutter.
Yeah.
And there are the all-important earplugs. The one thing they didn't offer us was earplugs. We got scratch pads and pens, and you could get a pen knife, all labeled State Steel, but nobody said, here, take an earplug. One woman did complain, and one of the workers went into this box and gave her a couple of earplugs. So after we toured State Steel, we went to the Dakota and Iowa yard in downtown Sioux City. And this is a regional railroad that kind of hugs the river. If we all marveled at how beautifully clean the locomotives were, whenever they send them through their 90-day federally mandated inspection, they thoroughly wash the locomotives. So they are thoroughly washed every 90 days. I take my car to a car wash about every 1.5 years. This is sort of interesting. They can make any locomotive into remote control just by hooking it up, just by hooking the MUs to that box. Once again, we could go anywhere we wanted in this facility. There was no tape marking off where you couldn't go. And it wasn't like it was, there were hazardous things, you could have gotten injured. This was our host who gave us a little talk about the railroad. And then
That's Tim Smith, who's
Tim
the
Smith, that's right.
operation manager for the railroad.
And he fielded questions from his little podium or pulpit, I guess you could call it. And we were an avid audience, and I mean, very, very good hosts. And they had this kind of daisy chain for their aggregate business there that they conduct right there on the premises. I was also told that elevator in the background is significant, but again, I was not taking notes like I should have. I thought I'd remember it forever. So we had a train ride, and it was on the Dakota and Iowa. We are looking at Sioux City at the, again, this is a 1951 road map. And then if you look in the upper right, left-hand corner, you see the cities of Akron and Hawarden. And that's, our trip was between Akron and Hawarden and back. We were bused to Akron. We went to a church for a lunch in the church basement, and included typical church lunch food, such as Jell-O with little marshmallows on the top.
Yep.
And then we walked over back to the train at Akron. So here was our train, locomotives at both ends. The gondola is there because it has the generator to power the two passenger cars. Those are former Northwestern bilevels, which were part of the Iowa Hawkeye train that used to take people to the Hawkeye games. And I guess they've discontinued that train. There were a few things to see in Akron. The old depot is still there.
Fertilizer building.
I
Coal
would assume so.
building?
And maybe still used. The tracks looked rusted, but they typically weren't severed. In the bilevel, that's Dennis Eggert, well-known modeler. Jeff Eggert, his son, also an excellent modeler, and the fellow who's kind of guided the construction of the new archives building at the Illinois Railroad Museum, keeping us apprised of each significant development. And then Kyle Blindauer, who ran the model and photo contest room this year. And at Sioux City Fertilizer, which is Sioux Fertilizer, I should say. It's between Akron and Hawarden. I was able to catch this interesting building, but despite going back using Google Satellite View, I cannot figure out where I was. Somewhere between, we were returning to Akron from Hawarden. I was able to find this elevator on Google Satellite View. It's in Westfield. And oddly enough, you've seen farm fields that have boxcars or refrigerator cars. Well, this is a farm field that had a covered hopper. Now we're going to look briefly at some of the models. Dennis Eggert brought some of his models for the display. So these are Dennis's. And if you know Dennis, you can be sure that if it's possible to put the detail on, he's done it. And one of his newest creations, which won him the Lloyd Kaiser Award, is this scratch-built turntable. And he also scratch-built that the white base. It's on his layout, but he scratch-built that white base so we could take the turntable to contests and displays.
And that's based on the turntable on Waseca, Minnesota.
And it's very similar to one that was in Milwaukee at the Chase Yard, and a little bit similar to the one in Shadron. Dave Casey, another modeler, Dave lives in the Madison area, also entered, it wasn't a contest, it was a display. Also entered these open load flat cars. Nice job there. And he entered this is his house. A geodesic dome house with a hill and a pond. And this won him the kind of the People's Choice or Best in Show award. Coming back from Sioux City, years ago, I'm driving on Highway 20. It's not really near any city, but if it's near a city, it's near Steamboat Rock, is the Iowa River Railroad. And at that time, they were running this GP30, which is a former Baltimore and Ohio. Well, driving the same bridge, I looked down and saw 2 locomotives. So I found a way to exit, and they've added a second locomotive to the consist. One thing about that Jeep 30, and maybe both locomotives, is that they leave a trail of oil wherever they go. It almost looks like the old Super O track that Lionel would sell with a center third rail, but it's not a third rail. It's just a grease slick. And they keep plenty of oil nearby so they can keep replenishing the engine. And it's a little ethanol facility. And that's, they interchange with the IC Canadian National up at Ackley, which is, who was it on this list that used to model Ackley? Was it John Golden?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's their connection to the outside world.
Yep. I also model Ackley, but not like John did. So.
Well, John sent me some marvelous pictures of Ackley. It's, but I checked the latest Google satellite view, and even what tracks were still in place for the Minneapolis and St. Louis when the prior satellite view was there have since been obliterated. They're gone. The tracks have been pulled up.
Yep.
So the final picture on my way home, and timing was getting tight, so I was passing by so much interesting stuff that I felt guilty, but I was trying to make the full drive back in one day that I couldn't successfully do on my way out to Sioux City. Was near Grundy Center. So we're or close to Grundy Center. So we're just off Highway 20. And it's this very interesting silo. So with that, I think I've reached the end of this little trip to Sioux City and what's in between.
Yeah, that particular corn bin that you showed there is, you don't find many of those anymore, do you, Doug?
No. Once in a while you'll find them, but they're pretty rare. I
That's
did
where
find
they-
I did find the location of that unknown barn. It is a barn about 3.5 miles north of Akron.
Oh, okay.
I sent a link in the chat for a Google view so you can verify.
Oh, thank you.
The last picture of the corn crib was for when they were still picking ear corn.
Right.
And that's why those are pretty well gone, because nobody picks ear corn anymore.
Yeah, those are really common.
Well, very good, David. Thank you so much for the presentation. Very
My pleasure.
informative.
And thanks for the additional information that was given and the comments.
Yeah.
If I would just kind of sermonize for a moment, I knew too many people who said, I'm not going to go to Sioux City. I don't know anything about it, and therefore, why would I go there? And to me, that's the very reason why you go to these things, is to see new stuff, not the same old stuff, but it was reasonably well attended. Tim can probably give us the actual numbers, but I thought it was all in all a very successful convention and had some good ideas connected with it.
And we had 95 for the full convention and 111 for the banquet.
Nice.
That might be down a bit from some
It-
recent ones.
We've been averaging about 125 a convention.
All
Anyway.
right. Well, very good, David. Thank you. And of course, if you're going to talk about Iowa and the Midwest, you've come to the right place for additional information.
Well, I didn't want to sound too affirmative or positive about anything because I'm in this crowd of experts who are
That's
quick
right.
to pounce.
Yeah, that's good.
They're called the Old Farts Detective Agency.
Very good. Well, next week, Doug, I think you are on. You're going to talk about the railroads of Warren County on the 29th. And then we'll be off on the 6th. And we don't have anybody scheduled yet for the 13th. So if you're interested, let me know. And we'll look forward to that. But next week is Warren County. Now, is that near you there, Doug? Where you live now, or did Doug drop off? I guess he did. All right, never mind. We'll find out next week. That's what we call a teaser. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
All right, good night.
Night.
Mm.